Welcome back, fellow shop rats. It's another Talk About It Tuesday, and today we're going to talk about painting. We've been doing a lot of painting on the channel lately, so let's talk about it. Well, we're not going to talk about that, but we're going to talk specifically about the differences between primer and sealer and what those products are for. This might be informative. It might not. I could be totally wrong, but I don't think so. I'm Mike.
This is My Cars Shop.
I've been painting cars since the 1980s, and painting technology has evolved just a little bit in the last 40 some years. So I get that I'm not up to date on all of the latest and greatest, but the principles pretty much are still the same. And recently somebody commented, it was actually on the episode that I was painting the grill, and they commented that it was never going to last because I didn't use any sealer. Now, there's a lot of misinformation that's been presented, and of course, paint reps are always trying to sell product. So I've seen it happen where paint reps will feed people a line of garbage just to get them to buy the product. So I want to clarify something from my understanding about what a sealer is and what a primer is and what the purposes of those different products are. So let's start right at the base, and let's start with primer and what the purpose of primer is. There are several different kinds of primers. There are epoxies, and there are urethanes, and there are polyesters, 2K, 4K, 6K a dollar, all for whoever, stand up and holler. There's all kinds of different products. An epoxy can be used right on the bare metal to seal things up, to be the base foundation for which you build all of your other products. Before painting, you would do your Bondo on top of that. You could do your urethane, 2K, whatever primers on top of that. You might use your polyester primer on top of that. I personally don't use epoxy much. I may use some on the Challenger. I'm not sure yet, but there's a reason I don't necessarily use that product. We'll get into that in a little bit. Primers are used to simply get product to stick to the material, like the metal on a car, as well as to give paint, whether it's a single stage or a base coat, clear coat, to give paint something to adhere to as well. Now, I want to touch base a little bit on the different types. Epoxy is a two-part product that hardens, just like the word. We get to, like you use tubes of epoxy to make a glue kind of a product. That's what an epoxy primer is. It's exactly what it sounds like. Where a urethane, 2K, whatever, is also a hardened product, but it's a different chemical, and it's not as durable or as hard. I should say not as hard as the epoxy is. Epoxy is pretty tough stuff. And then there's all kinds of 1K, 2K, whatever. I'm not familiar with all of that stuff. I just generally use a DuPont 2K primer or a Nason 2K primer for most of the stuff that I do. It's a primer that's fairly sandable. It's a high built primer, which means that when you spray it on, it will fill small imperfections, scratches, little, teeny waves in the panels and stuff like that. And you can sand it out and it will come out nice and smooth, and those scratches and things will go away. Urethane will tend to shrink a little bit. I've experimented with it over the years. We even did some experimenting on the $500 paint job truck with I left some in a cup to see how much it would shrink. Epoxy doesn't shrink like that as much, and urethane can, depending on the brand, but it can tend to shrink. Polyester primer is basically a sprayable Bondo is what it is. It is a hardened product that is extremely high build, extremely easy to sand. And in the day, and I still do it to some degree, skim coating an entire panel with Bondo and then sanding it down to paper thin. A lot of it's gone, so that you're just working out all those little panel imperfections. You can accomplish the same kind of thing with a polyester primer. Again, I view it as kind of just a sprayable Bondo. It's almost like it goes on and swells up just a little teeny bit as it hardens. I'm exaggerating, but not much. Probably, yeah. But anyway, polyester is a newer product that's only been around for the last 20 years, maybe. We always used spot putty or glaze in the past for some of the stuff. or regular Bondo, of course. Now, you're not going to want to take and spray polyester to fill a dent, obviously. It's for removing panel imperfections, for block sanding, and then you would go over that with a 2K before you ultimately painted the car. Sealer is exactly what it sounds like. It seals things off. It doesn't necessarily cause the paint to adhere any better than it does to primer, but it goes on over the top of the primer, and it's for a specific purpose, and that is to seal everything under it so that it doesn't bleed through into the top coat, or the top coat absorb into or through maybe some porosity in the primer. So it's to seal everything up real good and keep that bleed through from happening. I've only used it a few times in the 100 plus cars that I've painted. I'll try to remember to insert a picture here. I painted a 73 Dart Sport for a buddy of mine years ago, many years ago. The car had been painted a couple of times. The problem with painting over non-factory paint, the factory paint was under it. It had been painted again. It had been painted once, and then somebody painted it again, and my buddy didn't want to strip it. He just wanted to go ahead and spray it. That is a painter's nightmare, and that is exactly why I used a sealer there, because I didn't want to be spraying my top coat on and have that top coat bite through into some softer paint underneath and go and wrinkle all up. So I did use sealer on that car when I painted it. I'm not a fan of sealer, but it's because I really look at what I'm painting. Most vehicles, I should say, that I paint are stripped to bare metal. Not all. The $500 paint job was an example of one that didn't. But remember, we were painting that with water-based paint ultimately, so I wasn't worried about chemically it biting through and causing something underneath to lift or peel or bubble. I'm sure this is probably still true today. I am not as up to speed on the more modern products, yada, yada. But I know back years ago, and like I said, I'm pretty sure it's probably still true, a lot of your primers, your urethane primers, can be used as a sealer with a reducer added or another chemical added. So that kind of gives you a clue that a sealer and a primer aren't necessarily all that different of a product. That's why when you seal a vehicle before you spray it, the paint adheres just fine, because it's a type of a product, but it's designed to create a barrier between the top coat and the undercoats so that you don't get bleed through or peeling or lifting or whatever. Now, I said earlier that I'm not a fan of it, and that's because of a lot of the stuff that I do is like stitches here, stripped to bare metal. When I paint that, it's going to be, a long ways down the road, but it's going to be, I'll know every layer of product that's on there. So I'm not worried about something coming through the top coat or the top coat biting through to something underneath. That's of no concern to me at all. And I feel that sealers are just an unnecessary expense in a lot of cases. If you choose to use it, that's fine. But I don't like spending money I don't need to for anything when I know kind of what I'm doing. And, it works for me, and it has for a very, very long time. The second thing about it, especially when I'm doing higher end show cars, I don't like putting any more product on a vehicle than is necessary, because I feel, for one thing, if it gets bumped or chipped, it's that many more layers of material to chip, and the chips are that much deeper. But as well, the second reason I don't like using it is I find that a vehicle starts to look almost plastic coated rather than painted when you get a lot of layers of product on there. I like to do as little product as possible so that the vehicle doesn't look like it was plastic dipped. And I've seen show cars that look really, really nice, but they definitely look, in my opinion, like they were just dipped in plastic coat of some kind. And there's just a lot of material on the car, and you can tell that. Excuse me. The second thing I've seen is it seems like some cars that have sealer on them, because generally you don't sand the sealer. If you did, you would open porosity into it, so you spray it on and then you put your top coats on. At least that's what I was taught back years ago. Matt, you can correct me on that if I'm wrong. You're the professional here who does this every day. But I also find that when you're trying to get, especially a black car, and just be perfect mirror image finish with absolutely no imperfections, I've seen vehicles that have sealer on them that end up, I call it paint chatter, where it's just got like this, I don't know how to explain it. It's like this chatteriness in the paint job, and it's because I think the sealer sometimes didn't go on exactly right, and it wasn't blocked, and therefore it's hard. You can't take that out of the top coat. I know some guys will put their base coats on to get a really high good finish. They'll put their base coat on, and then they'll block that out with, they'll wet sand that down before they put their clears on, and that helps take some of that out. That's a lot of extra work, in my opinion, and I don't like doing extra work that I don't have to do. So I'm not a big fan of sealer, but I want to take you out to Wanda and show you a situation that happened when I was just rolling on Rust-Oleum, but it's a great example of where a sealer could have been a benefit. Now, if I had just primed that, it would have been fine and it wouldn't have done it, but I just want you to see what bleed through looks like up close and personal. Okay, if you look at the fender here, this was satin black rolled on with a roller over factory paint. Okay, no prep work, no priming, nothing. Factory paint is some of the best stuff to paint on if it's factory baked paint, because it sticks really good. But there's zero bleed through on this. Like I said, I did zero body work on this thing. I didn't care because this is a farm truck. It's going to get beat through the woods. I did the same thing on this door. But if you can see here, if I can find it, yeah, you can see the difference between, like in here, that's just satin black clear, and then you get into the door, not satin black clear, but satin black, and then you get into the door and you can see all kinds of bleed through of the silver through the satin black. This door needs another coat. But if this had been primed or sealed, that wouldn't have bled through. So what happened was, this door had been painted with some kind of cheap paint years ago. I sanded it all down, before I rolled the paint on there, but it did not flow out and haze out like that did. This bled through really bad because of whatever was on this door before. I knew that was a risk. I mean, it was painting these two things for, golly, what did it cost me? $3, I think. The cost of the roller and a little bit out of a pint or a quart of Rust-Oleum. We're going to do the rest of the truck anyway. The roof, I got a different box to go on here. The hood needs to be done. But this door was silver and that fender was two-tone bronze and tan. I wanted to get it at least looking all kind of one color. But this bled through because it wasn't sealed or wasn't primed. A sealer, this is a great example of what happens when you're painting over something that's been painted before. If I was doing a good quality job on this, first of all, I probably would have stripped this door. But second of all, if I didn't, I probably would have hit this with a sealer so that didn't happen. So to tell you how far back I go, when I worked in the hot rod shop when I was in college and we were painting cars there, all the show cars got painted with lacquer. Single stage lacquer paint. We didn't do any clear coat stuff. I am telling you, those were some of the most beautiful paint jobs that you can imagine. And the reason for that is because there was so little material put on the vehicle, so it didn't look like it was plastic coated and dipped. Shortly thereafter, we painted show cars with lacquer. We painted driver cars with single stage enamel. I painted my first 68 Dart that I had blue. I used just a single stage. I think it was Ditzler. We used RM lacquer and PPG. I think it was PPG made Ditzler single stage. And it was spray it and you're done. That's all it was. What it was what it was. You didn't go back and buff anything because nothing was hardened back then. You got what you got, and that's what you got. Turned out really, really nice. That's the first car I ever painted for myself. I had actually already painted a 62 T-Bird for another. Nope, that was later. Sorry. So shortly after that, they started offering hardeners for enamel. So when I painted the 62 T-Bird, I chose not to use lacquer. I used the Ditzler, and we added a hardener to it. I was painting that in a house garage, not in the body shop where I worked or the hot rod shop where I worked. And we had a lot of problems with bugs. So I did that one. After a few days, I was able to wet sand that out with 600 grit and wheel it out and buff it. It turned out really, really nice. Most of the bugs were gone other than some really long mosquito legs that were in the paint, but you could hardly see them. And the guy was just thrilled beyond measure with how that all turned out for him. So as I moved forward, then lacquer was getting harder to find. So I started painting stuff with hardened enamel and then wheeling it out. Lacquer, of course, we would sand and wheel all that out to get the really good high finish. But I didn't start painting base coat, clear coat until much later. I was still painting single stage, partly because it was so much cheaper. So when I did my 31 Ford, that was painted all with, can't remember the brand of paint. Oh, it was Acme paint. I probably still have some over there for that car. And that was a single stage enamel. And I actually have a bottle of it here somewhere. I think it's right here. Yep, I do. I knew I had one. It's still good. I would use this Auto Value Auto Body Master Wet Look Hardener. And this is still good. I have had this since I painted my Model A. And you would add so much to this to the single stage enamel, and then that would harden so that you could color sand and buff that paint out within a reasonable amount of time. Now, for the most part, any of those enamels could have been color sanded and buffed after a long period of time of drying. This accelerated the process. That was a game changer for me, but I kept painting my 31 Ford. I'm all over the place, sorry. I kept painting single stage for a long time because of cost. It was so much cheaper to just go buy. I painted my 31 Ford. I bought quarts of Acme Black single stage paint. I bought a gallon of reducer, and I would just go up and buy another quart of black as I needed it. I painted that Model A with 4 quarts. Had a bunch left over. Like I said, I probably got most of a quart still over there from all those years ago. And it cost me $100. This doesn't have a price tag on it. I think this stuff used to be like $5 or $10. And a gallon of reducer for that back in the day was probably $15. So I painted that Model A for $130 plus some other material, primers and stuff like that. So I probably only had $200 or $300, and that car was absolutely gorgeous. It became harder and harder to get these hardeners. You can still get them today, but they're not as easy to come by. And I just finally made the switch over to base coat, clear coat, and I've been spraying that now for the last probably 20 years, probably longer than that. I just finally, but it's expensive. I mean, it is. By the time you buy all of the chemicals and the reducers and additives and all the stuff, painting has gotten to be very, very expensive. So anyway, that was a primer on painting, mostly a primer on primer and sealers. Those are my thoughts. That's what I know. I'm not going to stand here and swear that I'm 100% accurate, but this is what I've learned over the years, and it's my understanding. And Matt, by all means, jump down there in the comments when you see this and correct me where I'm wrong. But I thought it was a good subject because I really do see people having a lot of misunderstanding in that. And you've got to put epoxy down. Then you do your body work, and then you do your priming, and then you do your sealer, and then you do your... Man, that's a lot of money for something that may not be necessary. Okay. Now, if you're doing it in a production environment and you don't have time to fix screw-ups because screw-ups are money, that's a different ballgame. I'm talking about how I do it here, trying to do things as inexpensively as possible. And if it screws up, then we just fix it. All right, that'll do it for this one. We will catch you on the next one. And oh yeah, don't forget, rock!